So once you have verified that your notches are cut correctly and the spars fit through these ribs with the plywood sides and everything fits, everything is loose enough that it doesn't bind and nothing is sloppy and you're happy with it, and you've also have your spars pre-drilled if you choose to pre-drill them, and you also have the angles cut on the ends of your spars the way that you want them, and you're just happy with these pieces parts and you're ready to start assembly, that is the next step. But I just want to reiterate that make sure that you have these things cut correctly, laid out correctly, and in place, because once you get the ribs onto the spars and you get everything epoxied, it's rather difficult to come back and try to cut notches and drill holes without at least marring everything around it, if not actually ruining the surrounding structure. So just take a moment and verify and check and recheck and make sure that your spars and your ribs are in fact ready to go. As I had done when I was building my wings, I went ahead and bolted these two pieces of oak to the top of my wood tabletop. Now I made sure when I made the tabletop that the corners were square 90-degree corners, and when I bolted the oak pieces to the tabletop I made sure that they too formed a nice 90-degree square corner. So now I just slide the center section spars up against the one piece of oak, and that obviously maintains the ends of the spars at the same plane so that the ends of the spars are even with each other, and then slide the nose of the ribs up to the other piece of oak. So with the noses of the ribs up against one corner or one length of oak and the ends of the spars up against the other length of oak, that keeps the center section nice and square, and it also keeps the ends of the spars even with one another, which is very critical. Very simple to do, and it's nice and convenient to hold everything square and in place. Here you'll notice that I have the spars drilled and I have the angles cut on the ends that I wanted, and I am starting the assembly process. As you remember from the pictures of the spars, I had already laid out with pencil marks where the rib locations are on the spars according to the plans. So now it's just a matter of going back and putting the ribs on the spars, making sure that the spars are pushed up against the oak piece so that they're at the ends of them. The ends of the spars are even with one another, and you have the noses of the ribs pushed up against the other oak piece. So now the center section is nice and square and everything is in alignment. Go ahead and put the ribs in their proper locations according to the pencil marks on the spars, and then do the epoxy and apply some clamping pressure to hold it in place. Now what I had done with the center section, as I did on the wings, I would just slip the ribs off to one side and put the epoxy right between my pencil marks on the spars, and then slide the rib back over into place, and then using these bar clamps, I put a little bit of pressure on the spars to squeeze them toward each other, which presses them up against those vertical pieces of cap strip. So again, take your time, pay attention, make sure that everything is square and in alignment, and go ahead and glue them down. Since we had cut the rear spars with the angle cut needed to get them to fit onto the ribs, there's no gap issues between the top cap strip and the top of the spar. However, on the front, that's a little bit of a different story. Now, I have heard people talk about this gap, and I believe the general consensus is that there is really no need to fill the gap. However, I felt more comfortable putting some kind of a filler in there just for my own mind's sake. So I ended up cutting these little wedges of spruce, and I made enough to do the entire wing as well as the center section. So just for my peace of mind, I went ahead and made these little wedge pieces, and I epoxied them in place on top of the front spar on the center section as well as the wings themselves, which if you've watched the wing video you already know that. So again, I don't think it's a necessity, and of course in my mind I'm thinking about the added weight, but it was a good trade-off because I just felt better having them there in place. These front supports are pretty straightforward to make and install, but there are two little items I want to point out. First of all, the way that you see them here in this picture, this is how they are shown put in place on the plans for the three-piece wing. Now I have seen a few pictures where the builder has put these two braces, both of them coming off of the front of the center rib, and then they go back to the spar toward the outer two ribs. That is not how it's shown on the plans, and I'm not really sure why they did it that way, but this is how it's shown, and I believe this makes most sense because you have at least two of the rib noses supported as opposed to just the middle rib supported by both of them. So that's just a little thing. I don't know if it really matters, but it's something that I have noticed. The other thing, what I had done, I had chose to put the supports centered on the nose of the ribs, and then I decided to keep the supports parallel to the ground as they run back toward the spar. So they look a little low in relation to the spar, but they're actually centered on the nose of the ribs. And again, I don't know if it matters, it's just something I wanted to point out. One small thing I want to point out on this picture is the little wedge spacer that is between the top of the spar and the cap strip on the center rib. Again, not sure if it's a necessity, but I felt better putting them in, and I just wanted to make note that the center one is in place as well. So next up are the compression struts that go between the spars over where the wing attach and cabane fittings are located. Now you'll notice in the plans, and for the life of me I can never figure out why, these compression struts end up being right in the way of the metal fittings and the mounting hardware. So what I chose to do was to move mine completely flat up against the end ribs and to move them slightly above the actual metal fittings so that there aren't any interference problems between the compression strut and the metal fittings and or the nuts and bolts that attach them to the spars. So structurally I don't think it changes anything. I like the fact that the compression strut is epoxied along the length of the end rib, and I like the fact that they are up out of the way of the metal fittings, which makes getting the fittings in and out easier and bolting them in place easier. So once I figured out exactly where I wanted these compression struts to lay, I just marked with some pencil. I marked some marks across all of the cap strips, and then just epoxied between the pencil marks, and then came back with some clamps and another piece of scrap wood to help spread out the load, I C-clamped the struts in place and let them dry. So a mild change. I don't think it's that big of a deal, but yet again it is a slight modification.
Hey everybody, just wanted to say real quick again, thanks for checking out my YouTube videos, and just a couple of real quick tidbits before you leave. If you'd be so kind as to check out my GoFundMe page, the link is down in the description of these videos. For those of you who find it in your heart to donate for this new cause of mine, I've got another project going on, and there's some really cool things I'd like to do with this aircraft, and again, that's all explained in my GoFundMe. But if you find moved enough to go do that and donate, I've got this horizontal stabilizer skin, and donors will get their name put on this skin, and ultimately when this gets filled and the aircraft gets finished, this is going to be hung up on the wall of honor in my hangar. Just a little bit of recognition for those donors who helped make the project a reality. Another thing too is, I'm sure you've noticed that even this video that I'm making right now is of the same or worse quality than the video that you just watched, and that's because, believe it or not, this camera is the exact same camera that I filmed the original hint videos with. So I just wanted to point that out. I'm not really sure why, but I know the video quality lacks, but hopefully the information within is worth something. And the other thing that I want to mention real quick is, again, these are little snippets from my hint video DVDs, so a lot of these individual clips just kind of come to an abrupt end. That's just the way it is when I'm trying to rip these DVDs apart and re-edit them into small little segments, and they just kind of end weird at times. But that's it. That's all I wanted to say. And again, thanks, and I hope you'll come back, check out my channel, and see if there are any new videos and updates. All right, I'll talk to you then. See you.